Oh, I think we're live. Hello there in YouTube land, TV land, or iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play land, wherever you are consuming this content from. My name is Eddie Mercado here with BloodyElbow.com, and welcome to the 6th Round Retro. The date is June 6th, 2003. The event is UFC 43 Meltdown. This went down at the Thomas and Mack Center in Las Vegas, Nevada. And my co-host today is none other than Bloody Elbow's own top flight combat sports journalist, the most handsomest man in MMA, Vic Rodriguez. Vic, sir, how are you?
Okay, number one, that's doing a major disservice to much better writers and analysts than myself. But the other thing really is it does a major disservice to Akiyama. I mean, that's the most handsome man in MMA. Let's be real. That's a very yummy man.
He was.
Yes, he is.
He was.
Still is. No, he still is. Still is. Always will be.
I'm giving you the honors, Vic.
All right.
You're taking the cake.
All right. Cool.
Okay, so UFC 43 Meltdown. It was a pretty cool event for me personally. We had Dana White with hair, Joe Rogan with hair, Randy Couture with hair. So this is that sort of time frame.
A lot of hair. Yeah, we saw even Goldberg had more hair. Goldberg and Rogan weren't even wearing suits. That was interesting to watch. They looked like they'd just come out of like Dick's Sporting Goods or whatever. They'd place a few bets over at the at the stop outside at the kiosk, and then they just went on in like, hey, it's just another day at the office. And Dean Cain was there also with a massive amount of hair. I was there, God damn, I feel fucking old, man. That's it was a very if you really want a snapshot of what the sport was like, you really want to watch that at least first 15 or so minutes as they're doing the introductions to get more of a feel of how, I don't know, what the sport really looked and sounded like at that point in time.
Yeah, Rogan never really wore suits, so he was always been kind of the collared shirt kind of dude. But
he wasn't even doing that then.
Yeah, but Goldie, he was just rocking some just regular t-shirt, like long sleeve tee, like almost like a sweater, but not really. But like his voice was on point. Like he wasn't like the awkward Goldie that he kind of turned into. He was kind of smooth for this point in time, which is, kind of weird looking back and seeing.
Yeah, well, I mean, how many events were they doing per year at that point? It couldn't have been more than, it was definitely less than 20. So, he wasn't burnt out. He hadn't had the years of mileage on him. So, yeah, it is different to hear him and see what was going on with him.
So UFC 43 saw the first installment of the Chuck Liddell versus Randy Couture trilogy. This was right before I graduated high school, actually. Princess Anne High School class of 2003. What's up? So I was super invested in the storylines and the gossip surrounding the UFC, especially the 205-pound division. You had the Chuck and Tito beef that was really intriguing. A lot of people saying that Tito was ducking Chuck and didn't want to fight him. And you had the Chuck and Randy saga part 1 right here. And then they went on to coach the Ultimate Fighter season 1. You had Randy Couture dropping down from heavyweight to light heavyweight, which was very interesting in and of itself. And then you had the Vitor Belfort and Randy Couture situation with Vitor winning the belt off of him from a cut. So this was like, it was almost as if the world's focus was shifting from the heavyweights to the light heavyweights, at least in terms of interest.
Yeah, this is, I guess, where I'm not sure if this is exactly where the line was, but when we talk about the prestige, or at least the era of the light heavyweight division being the prestige division, right? Being the premier quality division in terms of action, in terms of talent, in terms of athleticism. This was really that heyday, and it's sad to see what it's turned into, obviously, but it is worth looking at what it was like then and seeing where the skill was at that time, which, there were still very talented fighters. It was just much like today, highly concentrated within a smaller group of maybe 4 or 5 guys. But still, they gave so much of what they had at that point. So it really becomes a very compelling thing to watch and try to like make sense. Looking back and knowing what we know now.
Yeah, and if you look at the light heavyweight division now, you can't help but laugh. Like it's so bad that the champion is all fighting at heavyweight just to make it interesting.
Yeah, but I'm not laughing at Latifi. That's there's not a man about whom you should be having laughs, my friend.
Yeah, true, but who's he gonna fight?
Yeah, that's also true.
All right, so also interesting on the card, you had Chemo Leopoldo taking on Tank Abbott, both residing in Huntington Beach at the time. So there was a little bit of animosity between the two. I'm pretty sure Tank was talking all sorts of smack leading up to this. So there was a little bit of intrigue for the co-main event. We had Vitor Belfort returning from knee surgery, but this time with some new Muay Thai tools added to his arsenal. We had the baby-faced Frank Mir / Wes Sims incident, which it became notorious, where Sims went full savage. You never go full savage. We saw a draw, the ultra rare draw on the card, which was actually a fun draw. It wasn't like a boring draw. And then we saw someone knock themselves out, which is hilarious every time. It will never not be funny. When people knock themselves out, it is one of the greatest. So as Vic said, we had Superman in the house. Dean Cain was there. We had Vanilla Ice there. We had Mario Van Peebles was in the house. Oddly enough, I just got done watching Solo yesterday. I don't know if you've seen that. I shit you not. I watched Solo yesterday,
Jesus.
And then here we are with Mario Van Peebles popping up for some odd reason.
Yeah, I missed the Vanilla Ice part, and I'm not exactly in a hurry to go back and watch it. But that's interesting. Yeah, that those were the people around. It's a shame Mario didn't get bigger stardom out of the days where he was out there. But he's still cutting it, man. He was on Damages. He's doing stuff out there.
He just produced a video I watched. I watched this movie that was produced by Mario Van Peebles.
Oh yeah,
what was it? Oh, you know what? I didn't even watch it. I was going to watch it, but then I didn't because Nicolas Cage was in it. But it's the USS Missouri, maybe? Indianapolis. The USS Indianapolis starring Nicolas Cage. That's actually Mario Van Peebles' movie. So go figure. But he would cast Nicolas Cage in like an admiral role or like some sort of military higher up.
I'm not watching that shit.
Okay, so let's get into the prelims. There were only two of those. First one of which being Pedro Hizzo taking on Trey Teligman. Hizzo already competed for the UFC heavyweight title a couple times, falling short each time. He lost to Randy twice, and then he lost to Kevin Randleman as well. So he had wins over Tank Abbott, Vernon Tiger White, Josh Barnett, Mark Coleman, even Andrei Arlovsky. And so Trey Teligman came into this as it was an actual rematch. They fought way back when. I think Hizzo knocked him out the first time. Trey, he was the guy, if you remember, had the caved-in chest, the missing pectoral muscle. So, a little bit of familiarity here. Pedro Hizzo ended up winning TKO cut at 4:24 of round 2, but the fight was pretty exciting. Like Teligman came out rocking Pedro. Like Teligman had really sound boxing, and he came out and just his hands were finding the mark. And Hizzo was all busted up by the end of the first round. Actually gave the first round to Teligman. And then round 2, the tide started turning a bit after Hizzo landed one of his patented leg kicks that kind of spun Teligman around. And then Hizzo started going off with his hands and actually scored a takedown. Like what? Muay Thai, Pedro Hizzo scoring a takedown, landing ground and pound, elbows, the whole shebang.
Yeah.
Like, it was crazy watching him switch it up and actually be well-rounded and be a mixed martial artist. And he ended up cutting Trey from the elbows on the ground or something like that. Doctor came in, ended up stopping the fight, but it was pretty exciting up until it ended.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw it on. Well, I mean, of course you saw it on Fight Pass, but it's interesting to see that this fight was one of the earlier fights in the evening, and that ended up being in the Fight Pass collection. It's after the main event, but Hizzo definitely looked sharp. I mean, he had the patented heavy leg kicks and all that, but it was really how accurate he was with some of those shots to the head that ended up causing the cuts and everything that led to the severe bleeding. And Teligman was just so dejected in the end. Clearly not the way he wanted to go out. I mean, if you got to lose, you don't want it to be something along the guidelines of, it being outside of your control with a doctor stoppage or anything like that. So, yeah, you feel bad for Teligman, but they both gave it everything they had for, pretty much what was almost a complete 2 rounds. And pretty interesting fight. If you're interested in seeing tactics, if you're interested in seeing what striking looked like then, which, not terribly different from now, but these two were actually pretty good strikers for their era. They were, I don't want to say elite necessarily, but they were up there.
Hizzo was definitely elite for sure.
He was for a while. I don't know if maybe in this fight he wasn't, like, maybe he was starting to slide downward at that point. I'm not 100% sure. Like, I don't know. There's something that was a little missing here. I don't know if maybe he was just being cautious because of Telegman's boxing and his ability to cover distance. But no, still worth your time. Very, very much worth watching. So absolutely check this out if you get a chance. You don't be swayed by the fact that it ended in a doctor stoppage.
Yeah. So Hizzo, he went on to suffer some pretty brutal knockouts to Sergey Karatanov and Josh Barnett in their rematch, and Gilbert Yvel and Fedor Emelianenko, of course, got him too.
Yeah.
But he did pick up wins over the late Justin Eilers, Jeff Munson, Ken Shamrock, and even won his last fight by TKO back in 2015. So he's been coaching as of late. If you're familiar with Glory Kickboxing, he coaches Anderson Braddock Silva. Not Anderson the Spider Silva, Anderson Braddock Silva, two completely different fighters. And I got to say that Hizzo is one of the greatest MMA fighters to never win the UFC heavyweight title.
Yeah, that's also true, especially for the opposition that he took on, the way he looked fighting back then, the way he was, I don't want to say he was unstoppable or anything like that, but he was certainly a guy that you wanted to see get into that title picture, and it just never seemed to materialize for some reason. I don't know.
Well, he got into the title picture. He had multiple chances to win the title. He just came up short in all of them.
I'm sorry. I mean, yes, he never actually got to hold the title despite his talents at the time.
And poor Trey Teligman, in his very next fight, he got kicked in the head by Tim Sylvia to retire at 7-5-1. What a horrible way to go out, getting head kicked by Tim Sylvia. Yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, but that's what is it, 2003, 2004 Tim Sylvia, which I need to remind you and everyone else, very, very tough dude. Let's not fool ourselves here. Tim Sylvia was not, definitely by our standards today, not one of the all-time greats. He was for multiple reasons, but man, that dude, he got to a point where he got scary, man. He was actually really, really talented and developed some really impressive tools in his game. So let's not sleep on that.
Tim Sylvia, when he was starting to get his abs in.
Yeah, that was around that time, yeah.
All right, so our next prelim bout, one of the most iconic moments in my young MMA experience. Faliniko Vitali defeats Matt Lindland by KO at 1 minute and 56 seconds of round one. Now, when I say Vitali defeats Lindland, what I really mean is Lindland knocked himself out. Okay, so Lindland's going for a throw and just couldn't just muscle it just right. And Vitali did a good job of keeping his hips under him, and Lindland spikes himself on his own skull and goes unconscious, and Vitali falls right into full mount, lands one solid punch, and it's a wrap. So hilarious to me. Like, absolutely, I think it's funny. When people knock themselves out, like, it tickles my fancy. I could not root for Matt Lindland moving forward. So this was the last time I rooted for him. It was just one of those things. Like, you knocked yourself out. I can't support that. Same with Gray Maynard. He knocked himself out too.
I don't know if that's automatic grounds for dismissal of a fighter for the rest of their career. Exactly. It
is for me.
It just became really difficult for me to see him get absolutely posterized later on. It's like, this guy must have been some kind of curse or something that he's been struck with, because you had the knockout later on in Affliction against Belfort, and then you had the knockout with Robbie Lawler, basically prepared him for burial. You remember that? He knocked him out, and then he put his feet together and organized him, set him up a little bit of composition, as a true gentleman would do. Yeah, man, it's just like, those are my memories of Lindland, and it's just like, yeah, man. And this is coming from a guy that was able to forgive him for what happened, the shenanigans that he pulled against Murilo Bustamante, which was just another I don't know how he still doesn't get more heat for that. If you haven't seen that fight, I really recommend watching that one too. Short version of it is that Bustamante gets him in a submission. Lindland taps. He lies to Big John, tells him that he didn't. Then Big John restarts the fight. Bustamante's pissed. Lindland's sitting there with, he's trying to play it smooth. Bustamante gets him again, and then he really puts some extra English on it to wait and make sure that the ref is the one that stops it, not any opportunity for Linland to play coy or whatever the fuck he was trying to do there. So if I was able to get over that and then see that and then feel bad for him, I don't know, man. I mean, maybe you should too.
No, not me. Like I said,
fine.
this is right.
Okay, fine.
I'm 17 years old when I'm watching this happen. So like, I'm like, nope, like you're knocking yourself out, bro. Oh, you were a silver medalist in wrestling and you're knocking yourself out. Like, I'm rooting against you from.
Well, there's that other story about him suing to be on the Olympic team, but that's another story. That's going to take way too long.
Yeah, I couldn't get past. But so Linland, like you said, he went on to get brutally knocked out by a couple different people and submitted by a couple different people like Jacare and Khalidov and Fedor and Vitali. He would get knocked out in their rematch. They did an immediate rematch, so at least Linland got his revenge on Vitali. And still, though, he knocked himself out. Like I'm not going to get over that.
You're not going to let it go ever.
Nope.
Evidently not. Okay, gotcha.
All right, so that brings us to the main card. Frank Mir defeated Wes Sims by disqualification because Sims stomped a downed opponent at 156 into round one.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man. So Mir, he was 5-1 at the time, only lost to Ian Freeman. He subbed Tank Abbott with the toe hold, and this was 2 fights before Mir snapped the forearm of Tim Sylvia. Wes Sims, he lost his pro debut to Dan Severn, but went on a 6-0-1 streak before getting the call up to the UFC. So Sims came into this already as somewhat of a wild man, someone who, lives outside of the rule set, so to speak. And that really never escaped him. He's always been known as one of the dirtier fighters in MMA. Him and like Gilbert Ivell, like these are guys who just kind of have this asterisk next to their name. And whenever you discuss them, you have to bring up the fact that they bend the rules, break the rules. They're not exactly the most moral fighters out there, so to speak. So the fight happens. Sims runs right at Frank Mir, and of course, Mir just picks him up and slams him to the ground, starts working from side control, moves to full mount, takes the back, works the rear naked choke, goes for an arm bar, and then that's when Wes Sims is like, okay, let me spike Frank Mir and then grab a hold of the cage and start foot stomping his face while I'm standing above him, which is illegal as hell at the time. Still is illegal.
Yeah,
like,
still.
you can't do this.
Yeah.
So the referee had no choice but to disqualify Wes Sims. And like, what a wild man.
Yeah, I don't even know that I would call that a wild man tactic. That's just some dirty shit. And I don't know that that's see, okay, the thing with this whole situation is it's blatant outright cheating, and Wes Sims, one of those guys who I guess he just goes into those blind furies and doesn't realize that he's not doing something proper. I don't know if that's what was going on or he just really didn't give a fuck and hated Frank Mir that much. Like you said, that was basically the entire layout of the fight. He goes for an arm triangle. That doesn't work. He tries to go for tries to let him roll himself over. And Frank tries to sink in that rear naked choke. Sims sort of holds off on that because they're still fresh. And yeah, then after that, the armbar was looking good. I mean, the way he stepped up on his left leg and swiveled around, like that was basic and it looked great. But yeah, man, Sims just, that was disgraceful. I still think that's affected Frank. I think that's the beginning of where he started having, I don't know.
You're out of your mind. No,
I don't know. I do think that affected him.
You're wrong.
Do.
Oh,
that's
so
the kind of incident.
Accident. It wasn't the motorcycle accident. Come on, bro.
I think that's part of it too. Why are they mutually exclusive? Why can't they both be contributing to problems that he's had? I mean, come on. Like, I'm not saying that he's from there he was no longer stable or anything like that, but those are things that start to chip away, and you go, look, okay, that dude's suffering brain damage, and it's starting to show. And I think that played a part. Much like the accident.
You were right about Fedor this past weekend, by the way.
Yeah, I kind of was. What do you want me to do?
So, Frank Mir, he obviously gets stomped out here illegally, disqualification. They go ahead and run it back, and Mir absolutely just destroys him. I mean, absolutely brutalizes Wes Sims in their next fight. Doesn't give him the opportunity to be dirty, and then, of course, went on to capture the UFC heavyweight title from Tim Sylvia, snapping Tim Sylvia's forearm in 2 different places, and then the unfortunate motorcycle accident that put him on the shelf for 2 years, which I think is really what was the biggest factor in Mir's kind of decline, so to speak. But Mir made a return because he's as tough as it gets. Recaptured the UFC heavyweight crown from Big Nog, just to lose it in his rematch with Brock Lesnar. After this past Saturday, he has now lost 7 of his last 9. Just probably isn't done, even though he just got knocked out in, like, how long was it? Less than a minute? 48 seconds, maybe?
It was something like that. I don't exactly remember.
But he's in Bellator now, so I'm sure he'll probably fight Crow Cop or, some of the other legends that they have floating around in Bellator's heavyweight division.
Yeah, it was like 48 it was like less than 50. I remember that.
So Wes Sims, he continued to be a wild man. Like we said, lost to Mir in the rematch, and then lost to Mike Kyle in one of the dirtiest fights I've ever seen. I think Mike Kyle actually bit him at one point.
Yes, he did. He bit him in the chest, and you actually reminded me of this story one time during one of the vivisections where Mike Kyle was asked, why did you do that? And what was his response? Do you remember?
It was something like,
he does that shit all the time, or he cheats too. Like,
he's dirty too, or something.
He didn't do it this time, Mike. Please reconsider, honey, baby. No, don't do this.
At least he was
fucking
honest.
Mike Kyle, man. Yeah, but I mean, that's not okay, but doesn't make it any better. At least he was honest. Like, man, get the fuck out of here. You don't bite people.
Yeah,
shit, that's 101, man. Come on.
So Sims lost his last fight in 2016, so he's sitting at 24-15-1. But I don't think we're done seeing Wes Sims. I think we'll see him again before it's all said and done. He was actually scheduled for a fight back in January, but that fell through for various reasons.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead on with the second fight of the main card. We had Vernon White drawing even with Ian Freeman. It was 30-27 for White, 29-28 for Freeman, and then 29-29. Which I don't know how in 2003 a judge is coming up with 29-29, but it happened.
Yeah,
it definitely happened.
That is impressive, right? I mean, I don't know, like the fact that there were draws happening, they're still very rare now, even though the amount of events across the nation have been ramped up exponentially. But it is really very strange to see a fight like that end up in a draw back in 2003. I'm not sure how they were really scoring it. I mean, I wasn't thinking about the score as I was watching it. I'd forgotten how it ended. So I'm just watching this and thinking, man, White's looking pretty good here, man. His ground game is better than I remember. He's working takedowns. He's able to fend off takedowns of his own. His striking was looking pretty decent. He had that legendary Lion's Den conditioning, but yeah, that was a bit of a rough way to end it. Oh, stop. Come on. You don't believe that now, do you?
Oh, man. So, yeah, this was originally supposed to be Ken Shamrock versus Ian Freeman, but Shamrock was having all sorts of knee issues. Yes. So Lions Den brought in Vernon White, and it turned out to be pretty competitive with each man kind of giving it. They're all real back and forth with the scrambles, constant momentum swings, and there was a one point at the end of the second round, the bell dings, and they both just kind of sat there tired for a second, and the crowd went nuts and just re-energized them. The crowd was really into this fight. So
they were, and that's cool to see that it wasn't like them, the rain of boos that you get from the spoiled asshole fans. Like, no, this was, you guys are giving us a fight, and like we respect what you're doing, and that gave them that second wind, or maybe third or fourth or whatnot to get up and keep on going. So that was dope, man. Respect. That was great.
Yeah, this was a super fun draw. Not quite Mark Hunt versus Bigfoot 1.
No,
but a lot of fun and very even, very back and forth. So I'm happy that it was a draw. I don't know how it was scored a draw. Even Joe Rogan said that he thought Vernon White was robbed in this bout.
Yeah,
like
I
on
don't
air?
know about robbed because it seemed kind of close to me, but I don't know that I don't know that I can agree with the draw. Even though again, I wasn't really keeping a tally in my mind. I was more just really looking for tendencies and all the other stuff. But it did seem very. I was more confused than upset, if anything. I wasn't
Yeah.
really angry at
How
this.
do you get a 29-29 in 2003 without a point deduction? Without a
I
point
don't.
deduction.
That's the confusing thing. I don't know. I don't know what. I don't know how the hell they did that. I mean, there wasn't any clear 10-8 rounds for this to have happened. I don't know where you get those numbers from.
So definitely weird, but
Yeah,
a cool
very.
fight. Don't be turned off by the fact that it was a draw. It was highly competitive and pretty damn fun, I gotta say.
Yeah.
All right. So speaking of fun, Vitor Belfort defeated Marvin Eastman by TKO, knees and punches, at 1 minute and 7 seconds of round one. Now, Vitor was coming off that loss to Chuck, went and had knee surgery, so he took a year off and returned in top form. Returned with an afro, like he came to handle business. Eastman, he already had losses to Vernon Tiger White and Rich Franklin, but this was his first UFC fight, coming in 5-2. CFL football player, definitely like built, like had the look of someone in extremely great shape. But the fight itself, holy shit. So Eastman comes out and he's throwing leg kicks and he's like trying to close the distance. And as soon as he does actually get the distance closed, Vitor just grabs a hold of him in the tie plump and just starts unloading these explosive knees as he's like pulling his head into him. He lands one that rocks Eastman, sends him flying down, and then just goes ham with the ground strikes. And luckily the referee was there to rescue Marvin Eastman. But not before one of the most gigantic cuts you have ever seen in mixed martial arts opened up above his eye. Like, it was so bad that Rogan said on air that it looked like he was hit with an axe. And that's no exaggeration.
No.
Like, it was like, it was.
Yeah, no, it was severe. It was definitely severe. It looked like he had been hit with some kind of cleaving object. I seem to remember the fight differently though, because what I'm seeing at the beginning is a lot of feints by Eastman, just a lot of a lot of this, a lot of this, a lot of this, very very staggered motions. And then he opens up finally with a high kick that looked just way way off mark. I think it wasn't even a matter of gauging the distance. I guess he just felt like doing something explosive to keep Belfort on his toes. It wasn't until he tried to it looked like he was going for a body lock. Belfort is able to get his hips out. Eastman abandons that plan and tries to get another body lock, like a straight up hug, but he can't really get that with his reach because he's got all the beach muscles going on, all that, yeah? So Belfort is able to snag and get him in that clinch and then start working the knees. Eastman ends up basically swiveled around, ends up on his back, and you can see the panic on his face, and then right away Belfort goes to work. I'm not 100% sure. It seems like it was one of the knees. It had to have been one of the knees that opened him up.
Oh, yeah.
It couldn't have been one of the punches because that was brutal, but that was beautiful. You really see Belfort distributing his weight, bring himself all the way up, and he just keeps the control clamped around the guy back of his head. It was pretty dope. I mean, for a fight that ended that quickly, it was there's a few really interesting tidbits to note there. And it's a shame that Belfort was never really consistent as a fighter. We could have seen more stuff like that in other fights, but I think we're beating the dead horse meat at this point and talking about what could have been with Belfort and what makes him such a frustrating guy to follow and watch when it comes to looking at his trajectory.
He's definitely my favorite fighter of all time, personally. So I share those sentiments.
Okay.
But after what he did to Vanderlei Silva, and this was like my second favorite Vitor performance. Like, just the way he was throwing those knees was just so explosive. Like, he'd been doing it his whole life, and he just looked so scary. And everyone's like, "Oh, Vitor's back! Vitor's back!" And like his post-fight interview, he's so emotional and thanking everyone. We did it, mama! Like, just it was a great moment. I was like, "Yeah, that's what's up."
I don't exactly remember if this was around the time that his sister had been kidnapped. I don't believe it. I hope. Well, I don't know. I don't know if that was. This must have been prior to it, I think.
I'm not sure. I think
she never turned up. She never appeared. So, But
I know that Vitor went on to face Randy Couture next for the 205-pound title.
Yeah.
Actually won by slicing Randy's eyelid with a punch.
Mhm.
just to turn around and lose the rematch. But Vitor's still ticking. About to fight Machida at UFC 224 if that goes through on May 12th. So he's still around. That might be his last fight, though.
Yeah.
Could be Machida's last fight, too, for all we know.
Yeah, that's possible too. I mean, I'm part of me is kind of hoping it is, but I don't know. But yeah, we should also note Eastman went on to have a ton of fights after this. I mean, Eastman, more notable were, I guess, his losses, but just some of the wins that he had afterwards were Vernon White, Jason McDonald, Anthony Ree, Alan Belcher. He He ended up winning against Travis
That is
View.
probably his biggest win ever. Is beating
The Alan Belcher.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. Yeah,
I think it's fair to talk about the notable KO losses. You know?
No, but I'm going to get to that too because he ended up still with wins over Travis View and Rob Kimmons. Later on, Terry Martin in 2008, which was not a bad loss, but it's not as big as
it was his
win
UFC win.
True,
so that was kind of big,
but it's not bigger than the Belcher win in the Oklahoma circuit.
Okay.
But he ended up having losses to Travis Luter, which was a knockout, Jason Lambert. I'd already mentioned that he split win and a loss with Jason Guida. That was in that was World Extreme Fighting. Quentin Jackson beat him the fuck up back in UFC 67.
Right.
Drew McFedries, that was another ugly loss in the Ultimate Fighter finale. Dennis Kang up in the Canadian circuit where he retreated.
Mm-hmm.
He ended up having losses in Brazil to Ricardo Arona. Then another one to Ryan Jimmo, Steve Bossi back in 2010 by decision. Glover Teixeira at Shudo, Brazil in 2011. Like, why does this continue to happen? And then eventually against Sean O'Connell, the real OC, as some of you folks might remember, who had that brutal war with Steve Bossi. That was back in 2013. So
he was a jobber to the stars. Like
he kind of was, man. I mean, I know we're saying this with nothing but admiration. We're just using the term jobber to the stars as like, you had to beat this guy for you to be seen as someone who was okay or good.
There ain't no fucking admiration on my side of this table.
No, what I'm saying is there's certain guys, like there's like your main gatekeeper, and there's like your like lower to mid tier gatekeepers.
Marvin Easton was a bum as far as fighting goes. I always saw him as a bum. Again, I was 17 at this time. So
okay, but you're talking
in my mind.
Hang on a second. What am I want the opinion of 17-year-old. Well, I already got the opinion of 17-year-old Eddie. I know what the fuck that guy thinks. What is present day Eddie Mercado, Eddie Q Mercado Esquire? What the fuck does he believe about Marvin Eastman looking back at his career as a whole?
Today, Eddie Mercado can't help but feel the same as 17-year-old Eddie Mercado. Like, he just wasn't good.
Right.
Like,
I believe that. Don't backtrack the shit. You try to go, oh, that's what I thought before. Like, no, motherfucker. No, you stay.
It's still what I think now.
If you thought it then and you think it now, that's fine. But just own it. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, I own it. Eastman just was not very good.
You do now because I pushed you, motherfucker. That's what.
18, 15, and 1. Finished.
Yeah, but, I mean, dude, it's a hard life, and he probably didn't have like fighters back then didn't have the same kind of access and knowledge and everything that guys have now, and he just wasn't elite. A guy with his athleticism comes into the sport now at the age that he did, he would have probably fared a lot better. And if he didn't take some of the fights that he ended up taking. But Eastman, sometimes even if you have all those things, you can't put it together. Maybe that was a case with Eastman.
Maybe. I just think he was he looked the part and wasn't the part.
I mean, he was a big, bald-headed, muscular dude, which, yeah, back then certainly qualified you to look the part.
All right, so moving on, we got a decision here. Yves Edwards defeated Eddie Ruiz by unanimous decision. This happened in the lightweight division. Yves had already fought guys like Cal Uno and Matt Serra at this point. He was coming off a finish of Rich Clemente and riding a 3-fight winning streak. And the first, if I'm not mistaken, the first UFC fighter to rock a cowboy hat to the octagon.
You sure Dan Severn didn't do one of those stunts back in the day?
I was thinking maybe Don Fry. For some reason, I pictured Don Fry rocking a cowboy hat.
I don't know. We had a lot of Texas motherfuckers back then. I mean, somebody had to wear that before him.
Maybe. Possibly.
I don't know.
But the first I remember is Yves Edwards.
Probably.
Sure. Yeah. All right, so Ruiz, he came in 1-0 from the Cali regional circuit. Tough matchup for your second pro fight ever.
Yeah.
And he was a Tank Abbott training partner, which...
Hang on. Quick point. I have to make this. We have to emphasize this now. Okay, Eddie Ruiz was 1-0 coming into this fight. Eve Edwards was 22-7. I just want to make sure that everyone listening just goes, "Who's Eddie Ruiz?" Like, well, this is what you're dealing with, guys. Slim pickings,
Yeah, but Eddie, he was a really good wrestler, and he
Yeah,
spent the entire fight desperately searching for a takedown. But if
yeah.
he got it, I mean, Eves was just that much better of a grappler, and he would reverse the position, and it kind of went back and forth the whole time. But it was basically Eddie, defending for his life or trying to grab a hold of a single leg to try to stay alive because he wanted no part of Eve's stand up. Eve's stand up was just by far way better. Eve's grappling was way better, but the wrestling is where Eddie kind of hung in there, and it's what made this fight go the distance. Outside of Eddie Ruiz just being tough as hell,
Yeah.
like probably got that from Tank Abbott. Like you're rolling with Tank Abbott, you're going to be pretty tough. But just like Tank Abbott, Ruiz's style was really like UFC 4, while Eves was like extremely well rounded. So
Eves was
UFC 4.
WEC 39.
What's that?
Eves was at WEC 39, and this dude was at UFC 4. So like the game had changed, and Eve had made the adjustments. But, the thing that also needs to be mentioned here is how good Edwards looked when he was able to deter those the takedowns, when he's able to just shuck the guy off or just defend by pushing in his hips and dropping his weight. Like he looked great doing some of that, and his defense looked good. Even when he ended up getting taken down, he was able to work the Jansport offense, just get to the dude's back and stay there and punish him for a good while and try to work submissions, maintaining himself active and busy to do cumulative damage and just look hunting for submission opportunities. In this case, unfortunately, they never really came, but he still put up a hell of a fight there, man. It was interesting to see Edwards' progression then, even if it wasn't the most fun fight.
Yeah, and we talked about Eves on the last time we retroed for Elite XC Street Certified, and how he's just such a killer. 16 knockouts, 17 submissions on his resume. His knockout of Josh Thompson being one of the greatest of all time. And, what a just scary guy. Like, no one wanted to fight Eves Edwards. But a lot of people did. Like, the dude's record is insane. 42, 22, and 1 is what he sits at right now. So that's
amazing. He only had one draw. And this guy fought fucking everywhere. You can't tell this dude. Like Botswana, he was there. Korea, he was there. The Philippines, he was there. Like every fucking place. You know what I mean? This dude was probably fighting Ulaanbaatar in front of 3 people and the president, just chilling, man. It's weird, dude. Such a wild career. I'd love to see a documentary based on this dude's career because he's got to have a lot of stories to tell.
Yeah, and he commentates for UFC on Fox.
Yeah, he does. Much to the chagrin of Brendan Schaub, who I promise we will not talk about again when it comes to
We're not talking about Brendan Schlub right now. All right, so Eddie Ruiz, he never fought again after that, and I don't blame him because I don't think he had much more to offer after that. I think he did his very, very, very best, and I think he just realized that he didn't have any stand-up and he didn't have any jiu-jitsu. So, going in there and just trying to spam takedowns isn't going to get you very far.
No, yeah, I would agree. It's especially not against somebody who was as well-rounded as Edwards was at the time, who I think we can agree was ahead of his time as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All right, so that brings us to our co-main event of the evening. Kimo Leopoldo defeated David Tank Abbott by submission arm triangle at 159 of round 1.
Yeah.
Kimo at this point had already, went rounds with Hoist Gracie, Ken Shamrock, Dan Severn, Tsuyoshi Kasaka, but he's been away from the UFC for about 5 years. Tank, on the other hand, he already got submitted by Frank Mir, knocked out by Pedro Hizzo, lost to Maurice Smith, lost to Vitor Belfort and Don Fry. So it was clearly evident that the sport had already passed him by at this point, but he was still talking that trash. And that's a big
talking that good shit.
That's why this fight even happened. Both from Huntington Beach, California. Yeah. So this was bound to happen.
Yeah. It's like, as a wise man once said, someone way much more enlightened than myself, bandanas and bad grammar don't make you thug. And, Abbott, for all his tough guy accolades, He hit a ceiling here, buddy. He hit that thing hard because holy shit, Chemo fought smart, man. He really did. I guess I don't know if the UFC was banking on them just banging it out, and the Hawaiian wild man's gonna go swinging haymakers and shit. Like, nah, not really. That's not really what happened. I mean, there were some brief exchanges standing, but then as soon as he saw the opportunity, Chemo was able to topple Abbott over like a sack of apples and just able to keep his top control, slowly get in there, sink that arm triangle choke, and then. I for a moment, I almost thought the Tank went to sleep. And I think the ref did too, because he kind of reached out for his hand momentarily, and he saw that, his hand was still like moving and his legs were still moving around. So it was like, okay, so he's not totally out, but he looked like he was going out. You see Chemo adjusting his grip, moving his head a little, and then really applying the pressure. And that's where Tank just had to let it go.
Yeah, it was short and sweet. I mean, Chemo gets takedown into full guard, passes into half guard, passes into full mount, locks up the arm triangle, and allows Tank to squirm his way to make it tighter. So the more Tank squirmed, the tighter the choke got.
Yeah.
And so Tank ends up tapping out. Chemo gets up and does the arm shrug, like, get out of here, like this guy. Then he comes back and kisses Tank on the cheek.
Yeah,
like,
he does.
What a G moment for Chemo, which was
very much. And Abbott got up and he was pissed. Like, he didn't want to shake hands with Chemo's corner. And they're like, I've been owned. That dude is my father now.
Yeah.
There is no God for me anymore. This man is my father. And it was weird too. One thing we ought to mention here briefly, Chemo pulled that off from mount. Like, he didn't get off and adjust from the side. He was squeezing it. He was really muscling it from mount. Which, when you look at a guy like Abbott with his frame and his strength, that's pretty fucking terrifying, man. That was weird.
Well, if anybody's going to muscle an arm triangle from full mount, it's going to be Chemo.
Yeah, and he succeeded. Yeah.
And I don't think Tank spent a lot of time practicing his head and arm triangle defense. So
nah. He was practicing, what's the easiest way to dispose of the bones left over from a rack of ribs. That's about it.
All right, so Chemo, he went on and fought Ken Shamrock in his next fight, getting knocked out by a knee, which is probably one of Ken Shamrock's best knockouts of all time.
Yeah.
He won a Rumble on the Rock fight, and then he lost 3 straight to finish up 9-7-1 overall.
Yeah. Quick note on that. UFC 8 was the David versus Goliath event. That was, I believe, the super fight that they had. It wasn't part of the tournament. I'm sorry. I'm going back a second. Hang on. Chemo's fight against Ken Shamrock at UFC 48. That was a brutal one. That was less than 2 minutes, and then he went on to have losses against Manoa Man and eventually Wes Sims. That was his last fight in 2006 before his life pretty much spiraled out of control, and he was ended up in the throes of drug addiction. I don't know what the state of his condition is. I'm somewhat relieved by the fact that we don't have the. Every 4 or 5 months we'd hear that rumor of like Chemo Leopoldo found dead, and you're like, oh shit, and everybody would fall for it. We don't really get that very often, so either the novelty wore off or he's doing better to the point that we don't really have that concern.
Well, let's definitely hope that he's doing better for sure.
Yeah, I definitely do, because that guy, he really did fall in some hard times.
Tank Abbott, he went on to go 1-1 with Cabbage Carrera before getting finished a whole bunch, including Stepping Stone for Kimbo Slice, as we discussed last time on the Retro. Elite XC Street Certified. So Tank finished up 10-15, not including the Scott Ferrazzo rematch that took place in the backyard somewhere.
Unsanctioned, illegal, no. But how does he? That's the thing too. Like, okay, so he ended up fighting Cabbage. And that was a loss due to injury. But then he ends up knocking out Cabbage later on at Rumble in the Rock in 2005 before getting submitted by Hidehiko Yoshida and knocked out by Paul Buentello. I believe that was a TKO, not a straight knockout. Last fight being 2013 against Warpath Villarreal, who also didn't have any business whatsoever fighting at that point in his life and his career. Hard times. That's all I can say, man. It's a tough fucking life.
It really is.
Yeah.
All right, so that brings us to the main event of the evening. We had Randy the Natural Couture defeating Chuck the Iceman Liddell by TKO at 2:39 of round 3. This was for the light heavyweight interim title. Of course, Tito Ortiz was the undisputed champion at the time, but he, people say he was ducking Chuck and didn't want that fight. So
Yeah,
this fight happened instead, and the UFC was like, all right, well, if you don't want to fight him, we'll let Randy fight him, and we'll do it for an interim title. And that's what they did.
I don't really know what the story was, obviously, behind any of this stuff. I mean, I think that's, you keep hearing so many conflicting accounts as to what transpired and why these things were, why that fight never really happened when it should have back then between Chuck and Tito. But
well, Tito just had those excuses. It was always
we were training partners. I don't want to fight
before that,
friends.
you got to step back first. When that fight was supposed to happen first, Chuck versus Tito, Chuck stepped aside because Tito wanted the grudge match with Ken Shamrock. So Chuck said, all right, go ahead. Y'all can fight it out. So Ortiz beats Shamrock, and then on the microphone is like, Chuck and I are friends. We don't get paid enough money to be fighting each other. We got to renegotiate. And it was like, okay, obviously you don't want to fight. So this fight was made instead.
I don't see. Here's the thing, man. Like, why can't it be parts of both? Like, I don't know. I don't see why it's mutually exclusive, especially seeing how Tito always played hardball with the UFC to try to milk as much money as he could, as he should have. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's not really my place to do too much speculating on that right now. But yeah,
well, I mean, that's just straight from Tito Ortiz's mouth. Chuck Liddell's mouth was like, I want to fight anybody. I got plenty of friends, and I'll fight all of them. I just want to fight. I want that belt.
That's also true. But I do want to circle back to this. What we did see was a lot of interesting things from both fighters. I mean, it seemed like Chuck, after the first half of the first round, he was a lot more cautious with his movement. He wasn't really I don't know if he just wasn't able to get the timing right, or if he wasn't really able to close the distance the way he wanted to. But you see him sort of not having the same kind of frequency of strikes or anything. He tried some leg kicks. Randy caught a few of them early, and it just wasn't really working out. And then finally in the third round, Randy gets him with that monster takedown, just slams him down to the ground, establishes his mount position, and then just starts raining punches. And it's very sad to see that even then Liddell was going with that white belt defense, just holding his arms out like this and not really defending, not cupping anything. It wasn't until the ref stopped the fight that he was able to push off his foot off of the post that was up in that corner to be able to kind of buck Randy. And it didn't have enough oomph on it, but at the same time, it's like it was way too little, way too late, because the ref was already stopping the fight. So a bit of an odd ending if you look at it that way, but not very surprising considering how dominant Randy Couture was at that time. So very impressive stuff from both of them, but mostly from Randy.
Yeah, so I think Chuck just, once he got taken down that first time, that first big slam, Chuck was able to get up. Again, in round two, he was taken down, and he was able to reverse the position. But I think the threat of the takedown mixed with the forward pressure of Randy really threw Chuck off. Like the whole fight, Chuck's moving backwards and getting outstruck. Like Randy was moving his head and landing some pretty slick punches, and Chuck just wasn't ready for it. Like he just seemed like he wasn't ready. And you got to understand, like Chuck came into this fight on a 10-fight winning streak. Like he was knocking out Kevin Randleman and Guy Metzger and Babalu, and like Chuck was at least in his own mind unstoppable.
Yeah, that was his second career loss.
Coming in against a 39-year-old Randy Couture who just suffered back-to-back losses at heavyweight, losing his title. So maybe Chuck was sleeping on him a little bit and not expecting Randy to be as tough and as gully as he was. Like I guarantee he did not expect Randy to come out there and take his head off the center line and throw a hook. Chuck didn't see that coming.
I think that at some point also a lot of credit needs to be given to Randy Couture's training crew. I mean, they really seem like they, at least for that fight, had figured out some of Chuck's tendencies and movement as well. It's just a matter of like, okay, well, when he throws the 1-2, what does he usually do, right? What kind of openings does he leave? And it seems to me that really had played a major factor. And once Randy was kind of a little flustered with that, with the stand-up department, then Randy was able to, once Chuck was flustered, Randy was able to start threatening the takedowns and working from there. And once it got a little easier for him to do so, then he really was able to control a lot more. But then again, also much credit to Chuck. He was getting taken down, but then immediately able to pop back up. Even a little later in the fight, I think it was the second round, he got taken down right up against the fence, and he just, uses his elbows. He moved his hips. He got up and posted off with the other hand. It was actually really interesting to see how good his not so much his takedown defense, but rather his takedown recovery was at that point. And that's again probably one of those things that he does get some lip service for, but not really the true credit that he deserves, especially in that era for a guy with his upbringing.
Yeah, so like in the first round when Chuck threw that leg kick and Randy scooped him up and got the big slam, at that moment I was like, Chuck's in trouble here.
Yeah.
Like, of course, I thought Chuck was going to win going in. I was high on Chuck Liddell. I liked his sprawl and brawl. Like I was like, this dude's legit. But once he slammed him that easily, I was like, man, this is going to be rough for Chuck. And then I did not, though, in any way expect it to be rough for Chuck on the feet. And it got to a point there in the third round where Chuck was getting pieced up and actually went for a takedown himself. He tried to take down Randy Couture. Are you fucking kidding me? Chuck Liddell shooting on Randy Couture?
Well, he did end up taking him down later on in the fight. He was able to reverse position after Randy had taken him down. He was able to sit up against the cage, and I guess he did some sort of weird chancery where he spun around and then scooped Randy up from behind his legs and ended up with Randy on his back. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I think that was the end of the second round.
Yeah, but probably.
It was crazy, though. It was just a crazy fight. Nobody saw that coming except for Randy Couture. I mean, holy shit. Pure madness. Of course, on the microphone afterwards, Randy calls out Tito Ortiz. He's like, hey, if you want this belt, you got to come in here and take it. And Randy became the first ever two-division champion before it was even cool. And honestly, this was the night that Randy Couture became a legend.
Yeah.
Like, already two-time UFC champion, like, that's cool and awesome all on its own. But being the first to drop down and win the 205 title while being 39 years of age, like that's legendary shit.
And also, again, guys, the context of the era, man, this is one of the greatest upsets of all time at that point. Like no one really, I don't know who would have expected this to happen. And it was just sort of like a fun thing to put together. And, what if he could actually pull it off? But yeah, he did it, man. Your boy did it. He pulled it off.
Yeah, he did it, and then he went on to unify the title by beating Tito Ortiz at UFC 44. Remember, he spanked him during the bout, which was hilarious.
Yeah.
Good old Randy. And then he loses the belt to Vitor Belfort at UFC 46, cut on the eyelid, and then wins it right back at UFC 49, which set up Chuck and Randy 2, also set up Chuck and Randy on the Ultimate Fighter Season 1, which was iconic in its own right. So Chuck, on the other hand, he took his talents to Japan for 2 fights. He knocked out Alistair Overeem, and then he got TKO'd by Rampage Jackson before coming back to the UFC and beating Tito Ortiz and beating Vernon White, which got him his rematch with Randy. And by the way, his knockout of Vernon White was hilarious. Watch how Vernon Tiger White gets knocked out. It's funny.
That was rough to watch too. Yeah.
All right, so let's recap real quick. We had Chuck and Randy 1 before they became tough coaches. Randy becoming the first person to win a belt in 2 divisions before it was cool. Defying the odds, like stopping Chuck Liddell, who was favored. The odds makers had Chuck reasonably favored. He was like minus 220, I believe, something like that. Randy became a legend. He went on to become an MMA god when he defeated Tim Sylvia to recapture the UFC heavyweight belt for the 3rd time.
Right.
But this was him becoming the legend. You had Chemo versus Tank, which was interesting. Chemo winning Submission of the Night honors, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
Go figure.
Yeah.
Savage Vitor Belfort opening up one of the worst cuts of all time on Marvin Eastman. We had a pretty fun draw with the mysterious 29-29 scorecard. I'm still the jury's out on that one.
Yeah.
And we had Wes Sims getting disqualified for stomping out Frank Mir on the ground.
Stubbing the world's largest cigarette.
And then Matt Lindley knocked himself out. I'll never forget that. His over Seligman was fun. So the card is, I mean, it's worth the watch. You can find it all on Fight Pass. Go check it out. Vic, what are your final thoughts on UFC 43?
Yeah, man. I mean, it's a little on at face value. You know, yeah, you got some big recognizable names even to this day, but it really merits closer inspection. It is an event that you should certainly watch, even if you might want to. The Eve Edwards fight was probably one of the least exciting bouts on the card, and even that was an okay fight. It wasn't a bad fight. I'm just saying it wasn't what all these other holy shit moments that kept happening in the throughout the course of the event. But yeah, it's worth looking at again, the sort of time capsule element and seeing where the game was and what some of the elite at the time were really capable of doing.
And a lot of holy shit moments.
Yeah, there were some really good holy shit moments. Absolutely.
Cool deal. Well, that is our show. So thank you for tuning in. Vic, thank you so much for joining me. You can follow Vic on Twitter at Vic M. Rodriguez. You can follow me on Twitter at The Eddie Mercado. You can read us both over at bloodyelbow.com. If you like the show, smash the like button. It's the thumbs up down below. It really helps us out.
Yeah.
In the comments section, tell us about your favorite early MMA experience, whether it be Pride, UFC, Elite XC, Strike Force, whatever the case may be. Subscribe to MMANation.com. That's DOTCOM on YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud, maybe even Google Play if we're up there. Stay tuned for all of our shows. If I Did It, The MMA Depressed Us. We'll be back next week with The Care Don't Care, Vivisections, Heavy Hands for UFC 224 and Bellator 199, which are both taking place on the same day, May 12th. I have an interview coming out with top atomweight Kira Batara, so be on the lookout for that over at Bloody Elbow.
Nice.
Did we miss anything?
No, not really. I've got an interview coming up with Fight Lawyer, who is going to talk to us about the Conor McGregor situation and legal repercussions, as well as the crew over at KSW. We've got some interesting thoughts there as well. And finally, former Invicta champion and current UFC talent, Megan Anderson, who was kind enough to give us some of her time. So just be on the lookout for that. That'll all be pumped out this week.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for tuning in. We will see you next time. Now go be a good person.